Hello, welcome to Spirit Pig. This is the show that explores how to live a fulfilled life. I'm Duncan CJ, and today I'm speaking with Dr. Judson Brewer. Dr. Brewer is a psychiatrist and internationally known thought leader in the field of habit change and addictions, combining nearly 20 years of experience with mindfulness training with his scientific research. He's the director of research at the Center for Mindfulness and associate professor in medicine and psychiatry at UMass Medical School. Is adjunct faculty at Yale University and a research affiliate at MIT. He's been featured in Time, Forbes, BBC, Business Week, among many, many others, and his latest book, The Craving Mind, From Cigarettes to Smartphones to Love, Why We Get Hooked and How We Can Break Bad Habits, explores how habits form, why they're so hard to overcome, and the research that gives us hope they can be changed. Judson, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now, I like recently I've been pretty into actually building a bit of context beforehand. So I just to kind of set the scene, like, why addictions? Like for you, like what is it about studying habit change addictions that has resulted in, I guess, almost 20 years of study on this topic?
This is something that is universal to all of us, and I like challenges. You know, one of my PhD mentors used to say, "Go big or go home," and this is probably the biggest challenge that I see that faces all of us as a species.
I love that. I love that mantra, "Go big or go home." I think, yeah, I'm going to adopt that one. So as an addiction psychiatrist, you've been obviously seeing patients for years, and obviously it's great to be able to help people remove sort of the bad habits or the destructive habits. But in your experience, what kind of typically what lies under the surface? What are some of the most common root causes of addictions?
I would say the most common root cause itself is how our brain's set up. So our brain was set up to learn, and it was probably set up to learn where food is. So if you think of the most basic habit loop, we see some food, we eat the food, and that registers to our brain calories, survival, right? Then we've set up this loop that helps us remember where that food was so that we can go back and find it again. So this is really a survival setup for us. If you think of it as a habit loop, and the survival setup was there to help us remember where food is and also to avoid danger. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. Because how would you say? I mean, I know that a percentage is a completely stupid question to do because I'm sure it can't be broken down that simply. But like, okay, if your number one would be just the way our brain's made up, how much of a part would, say, emotions, things like self-love, confidence, like, is that just a whole different field altogether, or is there some overlap with these things?
There's a lot of overlap. So let's use the same habit loop that we're talking about. What our brains can do is when food is plentiful in everyday, in modern day, at least in the Western world, there's a McDonald's on every corner or a fast food restaurant. Our brains say, why don't we use the same process to make ourselves feel better? So if we're feeling stressed out, we eat a cupcake or some chocolate and we feel better, and we adopt that same habit loop. So emotions are intimately at play here. In modern psychology, we call this positive and negative reinforcement. So we positively reinforce things that have to do with positive emotions, and we negatively reinforce, as in we try to push away these negative emotions, and we learn behaviors that do that, so that becomes a habit loop in itself as well.
And then that's just this is operating almost like our software now. It's so ingrained in us. We're not even consciously making this decision. It's just like rinse and repeat.
Right. If you want to think of it cynically, you could think of humans as these binary associative learning machines. Approach, avoid, 1 0 1 0.
Now, I mentioned it in the intro, but like this comes hand in hand, and a lot of the focus and on the work is around this idea of mindfulness, and mindfulness has become almost such a buzzword recently. Like we hear it being chucked around a lot. Just so everyone's on the same page, what do you mean by mindfulness?
Well, there are some classic definitions, but I've actually started to move away from the word mindfulness because of exactly what you said. It can mean so many different things, and it's a concept. So, a classic definition by Jon Kabat-Zinn is, paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. What this really breaks down to pragmatically is this awareness that comes up, and that positive and negative reinforcement where we're trying to hold on to pleasant and push away unpleasant. This is about awareness of all of that process and not being caught up in it.
Okay. And so it kind of ties into this idea of when you're saying like push away from the unpleasant, it's like this idea of pain and suffering. I saw the formula which you mentioned, how you got taught a formula by a meditation teacher, and that is suffering equals pain times resistance.
Yes, Shinzen Young coined that one.
Could you explain that to our audience, what you mean by that?
I think it's brilliantly simple in the sense that it's not that suddenly with meditation or awareness we can make unpleasant things go away. It's quite the opposite. We add our own suffering to pain. So that's where the equation comes in. Pain is there. We can have painful events happen. We can stick our hand on the stove and it hurts. But when we resist painful things, right, this is pain times resistance, now we suffer. If we stop resisting, if we stop getting caught up in stuff, resistance goes to zero and suffering therefore goes to zero as well. Suffering equals pain times resistance.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so talking about the back to the habits, like when trying to break bad habits, you've recommend a 2-step process. Step 1, we got to look at the habits and ask, what do I get from this? Mm-hmm. Why do we ask that question? What's the impact of that question?
Well, positive and negative reinforcement, it's called reward-based learning. So that's learning that's based on rewards. So our brains have become habituated to certain quote-unquote rewards. And if we don't look at those rewards closely, we just keep doing them habitually. And they may have served us in the past, but they may not be serving us now. They may actually be causing harm. So for example, with smoking, we train people to pay attention as they smoke. And so they can really see clearly what those rewards are. What do I get from this, as you said? Well, what they realize is that, and some people wake up, they're like, I've been smoking for 30 years and I never noticed this before. These cigarettes don't actually taste very good. That's why they put menthol and they flavor cigarettes, because tobacco is actually a toxin that plants make so that animals wouldn't eat them. And here we are cultivating it. Anyway, so this is all about seeing clearly what these rewards are so we can recalibrate our brains so our brains can say, that's not as rewarding as I thought. And that helps motivate behavior and change. That's the first step. Okay,
so step 2, RAIN. What's that?
Yeah, so once we start to become disenchanted with these behaviors, RAIN is an acronym that we use, and we actually have science behind it showing that it decouples craving and behavior. It's basically recognize. So if we're in autopilot, we're just going about acting habitually, we're not going to change any behavior. So first step is recognize, what it is, whether it's a craving or anxiety or an urge to eat a cupcake. The second thing is to accept or allow. So in order to work with our cravings, we can't say, hey, craving, you stay over there and I'll be over here and we'll be cool, right? No, you have to get up and close with it. So we allow it to be there and see if we're resisting it. If we're resisting, see if we can let go of that resistance and start to get closer to it. Like, what is this like? And that's what the I is, investigate. So we get curious. Oh, what does this craving feel like in my experience right now? Oh, it's tightness, it's tension. My shoulders are clenching. There's a contraction. And then we can note from moment to moment, that's the N, what these sensations are. And when we note it, we realize a couple of things. One is these are just sensations that are driving us to do all sorts of things. They don't last forever. And as we note them, we can kind of ride that wave rather than getting sucked into it. Somebody we have this eating program called Eat Right Now. And on our online forum, somebody just commented on writing out her first craving, for eating. And it was awesome. She said, she gave this whole scenario where she walked into the kitchen and then she got like a stopwatch or a timer, sat down at the kitchen table and just started noting what her experience was like. And she said 8 minutes and 13 seconds later, the craving was gone. And so she took this whole curious investigative attitude to say, well, what's this craving actually like? How long is it going to last? And she said 8 minutes might sound like a long time, but in the realm of my life, to realize that I can have a craving, have it come and go and not get sucked into it is huge.
So would we, because if we can break it down and it's simple and we just follow those steps, but then if we were doing that many times a day, it seems like a lot of work. Is that just until we can just get over the main hump till we can just break the habit? And then like how would we have to be doing that every single time, or can that then become the new habit, like of choosing healthy, or how much work is involved? Because I think naturally we're always, I think we're naturally quite lazy, aren't we? We naturally look for the easy option. Like, is this like, oh my God, I've got to plan every single time I want to not do something, or is that just until we break the back on it?
So the key here is with that two-step process, it's not about I just have to force myself to ride this out. And this is cognitively what our brains turn to. They're like, okay, if I just do this rain exercise, then I'll be able to nail it. And that's a big problem, actually. So we use this gear analogy where the first gear is recognizing our habit loops. The second gear is the what do I get from this? And then only when we see clearly what we get from this do we start using the RAIN acronym to write it out, because it helps it happen effortlessly, right? Curiosity itself is not something that takes a lot of grit or force or willpower. It's simply turning towards something and being like, oh, what's that like? What's that like? And that's effortless. When we're really, really curious about something, it's actually energizing. Like, oh, wow, look what I just learned. And in that way, the disenchantment builds and builds. And also we literally stop feeding the habit loop. As we stop doing the behavior, it doesn't come as strongly or as much in the future.
I'm glad you mentioned curiosity again, because I was going to ask even more about that one, because naturally, like, the default is, like pain, to push away from it. Just let's get away from this pain, whatever it is. Let's, this unpleasant experience, let's move it away. And that curiosity it's counterintuitive, because there's a painful situation, and in fact, let's go in, let's look at it, let's get the magnifying glass out and take a closer look. And that's an interesting sort of, it is counterintuitive, but by having that curiosity, then like you said, it kind of, why is that curiosity? I mean, you've mentioned it, but why is that so powerful?
Well, if this is such an evolutionarily conserved process, I would argue, why don't we see if we can hack that process itself? If we can tap into reward-based learning, we don't have to bring any external tools in, and we know that it'll work because this is one of the oldest learning processes known to man. So if the trigger, let's say the trigger is stress, we eat a cupcake to feel better, and we feel a little bit better, because we get the dopamine rush or whatever in our brain. That is an externally driven reward, right? We have to eat something outside of ourselves to feel a little bit better. And in fact, that actually literally feeds the process, because then we become dependent on eating cupcakes to feel better. What if instead we hack the process? If stress is the trigger, the behavior is to get curious, and we turn toward it like you're talking about. What's it feel like when we're curious? It actually feels good. So that becomes its own intrinsic reward. Limitless, and it's our own. We just tap into into the system itself. We're not doing anything extra.
I like it, because it's like, hey, like, this is how we operate. This is the software. Rather than putting this massive resistance up and just trying to go against what feels natural, let's use the rules of the game, and then just it's clever. I love it.
It doesn't get much better than that, especially because we can't trust our prefrontal cortex, the part that says the willpower part of our brain. That's the first part of our brain that goes offline when we get stressed. So we can't trust it.
Do any of these ideas and these studies and this research, does this new data that's coming in, does this sort of, I don't know, fly in the face of traditionally our understanding of habits and addictions, or does it complement the existing narrative?
It complements the basic research. So the research, if you think about it, there was a guy, Ed Thorndike, who wrote a paper back in the 1800s on animal behavior. B.F. Skinner became famous for the Skinner box and operant conditioning and positive negative reinforcement back in the 1950s. Eric Kandel got the Nobel Prize showing that this is evolutionarily conserved all the way back to the sea slug with only 20,000 neurons. So this is lock and step with the basic research understanding. Where it's somewhat different is the approach for fixing the problem. So hacking the system itself, I have not seen others do that. There's been a big focus on cognitive, like willpower-based things, calorie counting, track your steps, this self-monitoring, but in the sense that, I have to meet some goal based on an external reward. So I haven't seen anything besides mindfulness training that actually taps into the intrinsic rewarding properties itself.
No, yeah, exactly. It's fascinating because it's, like this cigarette, let's really focus in on like breathing it in. What does it taste like? How does my lungs? Like, let you like using that total focus and in the moment to experience that. That's it's a whole different angle.
And so one of the most common things that people report when they breathe in, the word is burning. Well, that doesn't sound very pleasant, does it? Oh, I'm burning my lungs.
What have been some surprising results or research over the last 20 years? Have there been occasions when you were doing a study, or maybe you've read a study and you were expecting or pretty certain the study was going to show one thing, and then actually the results came out and maybe it was the opposite, or it went down a whole different route?
There was one piece that was pretty surprising. So with this behavioral conditioning stuff that we've been talking about, our data have been surprisingly solid. So we've gotten 5 times the quit rates of gold standard treatment for smoking cessation. We get a 40% reduction in craving-related eating with our Eat Right Now program. So we're seeing a lot of convergence with different behaviors, but same mechanism there. So that piece, and also it's not our hypothesis. We stole this from the Buddhist psychologist that proposed this 2,500 years ago. So this is just kind of following up on work that was done before paper was invented.
That's what I love about so many of these interviews. We're seeing so much things when there is like latest cutting edge science backing up what a lot of like ancient wisdom texts and traditions have been saying for years and years. It's like, okay, the data's out, guys. We've got it. Oh shit, right. It's been said for 2,000 years.
It's been said, right. And I'm happy not to, I don't need to have something attached to my name. I just want to find stuff that helps people. But one of the really striking findings for us was when we were doing neuroimaging studies of experienced versus novice meditators. And we brought them in and we were looking at a bunch of different meditation practices, and we were looking for that brain region that got activated when you're meditating. Like, okay, now I'm activated. Now I'm meditating. And we found not a single statistically significant result where there was increased brain activity in experienced versus novice meditators. So we were like, what's going on here? But in fact, when we opened up our somewhat narrow view and said, well, let's just look at the whole brain and let's look to see if there's increased or decreased activity, this whole big thing opened up for us, where we found that there's a network of brain regions called the default mode network that was actually quieter or decreased in activity in experienced meditators. And it turns out that network gets activated when we are ruminating, when we're thinking about past and future, when we're craving, when we're anxious. So all of these things activate this self-referential network, like, oh, I'm craving. Oh, I'm getting caught up in my experience. And with meditation, that network quiets down. So it actually makes a lot of sense. It's just not something, and meditation, turns out, it's not about doing. It's about being with whatever's happening instead of trying to do something about it. So when we looked back at it, it actually made a lot of sense. I had just, kind of naively thought there was going to be something that was going to be this doing, because that's what I'd been trained to do, right? It's like, oh, that's how I got through college. Just hammer hard at the studying, just do it, as the Nike commercial says, right? Well, the mindfulness commercial would say, well, just be it, perhaps, or just be something like that.
It's interesting. That's so. What would be the? I'm trying to get my head around that. So, what would be the implications? How would that show itself? So it.
I'll use an analogy.
Yeah,
let's see if this answers your question.
I need to paint a picture in my head.
So if we're driving a car, okay, and we drive the car with one foot on the brake and one foot on the gas,
okay,
we're not going to get very good gas mileage, right? And we're going to wear out our brakes pretty quickly. And that wearing out our brakes, think of that as chronic stress, where we're constantly stressed out. Now, what if you take your foot off the brake? You're not adding any more fuel, but you're more efficient and your brakes are going to last a lot longer. Well, that's what this is about. When this default mode network stops getting in the way, like, I'm going to do this, what if we just let it happen? Not only are we more efficient, but this is where we move into the territory. If you take that to its extreme, we move into flow, the territory that Csikszentmihalyi talked about in terms of effortless, selfless, timeless, joyful, that type of thing. That sounds pretty good, eh?
You're working and 8 hours have passed and you haven't eaten, you haven't gone to the loo, and you're like, oh shit, where did the time go?
Yep. And it's been immensely joyful and productive.
I love that, and thank you for the analogy. That really helped me. I was like, yeah, and I got the picture, I got the gears, I got it now. What is the worst advice you hear or see being dispensed in your world, your industry? Like, is there anything where you hear and I don't know, you're just like, no, that's not the case.
Just do it.
Yeah.
As in, just force yourself to overcome your habit or your addiction or whatever. And I'm thinking, no, that's just, we've seen it time and time again. That's just not going to work.
Yeah. What does a fulfilled life mean to you?
One in which we live, there's this connection between humans and we live in harmony. I mean, that sounds kind of hokey, doesn't it? But to me, to have a connection, not just like an internet connection or a text-based connection, but a true, genuine, non-boundaried connection with others in which we're helping, in which I'm helping all of us flourish. That's fulfilled for me.
What was I going to say? Yeah, this is actually one more thing I wanted to ask about something earlier. Like, in terms of like the habits and addictions, like you look down the street, you're on public transport, you're in a restaurant, and you can now guarantee that a large percentage of people are going to have their face in their phone, head buried.
Yeah.
What, from the point of view of an addiction psychologist, like what do you make of that? Now, where I mean, is this huge alarm bells? I mean, should we be worried about the future? Because if we are, like, what do you make of that whole thing?
Yes, we should all be very concerned about this. We're starting to see more and more data come out showing how addictive this technology is. And if you think of this, it's like a perfect storm. So we have instant access to distraction, right? So these are tools of mass distraction. I think that's been coined before, where we can, anytime we're distraught or we're bored, we can just pick up our phone and distract ourselves. So you pair that with things like social media, where we can get ourselves out there and have the instant hit of somebody like a post that we just made, which it also fires off dopamine in our brain. Pair this together with gossip, where we can look to see what others are doing and we can compare ourselves to others. So all of this becomes immensely sticky. It's like this perfect storm where this technology addiction is just growing and growing and growing in the world. And we've already seen texting while driving as dangerous, if not more dangerous, than drinking and driving. And so people are already addicted to their phones to the point where we're seeing texting based accidents in cars. Pedestrian accidents are on the rise. There was even a study that showed that pediatric emergency room visits were increased proportionally as the iPhone was rolled out across different cities in the United States, because parents aren't paying attention to their kids as much. So I think this is something that's really, it's not that we should throw technology away, because that's not going to happen.
Sure.
But it's like, drink responsibly, and this is about using technology responsibly. Yet the big challenge here is it's socially acceptable to have technology. So the key for this is also going to be seeing really clearly, what do I get from this? So that we can start to learn, when I'm constantly checking my news feed all the time, I'm actually less happy than when I only check it once a day or twice a day or whatever I need to do.
Yeah, because that's what I was going to say about, because say, for example, whatever, overeating or smoking, there might be a conscious decision like, hey, I know this is a habit, I know this is an addiction, but I want to change it. And so you can go through those 2 steps that you mentioned. It's like, at least you're meeting it halfway, With
Yes.
something like, with the phones, most of us, or many people, we don't even think it is a problem, full stop, or it's not necessarily like even on our I don't know, decision-making thing where we're like, oh, this is something I want to like cut out. So without that first like meeting halfway, without actually that interest of doing anything about it, how,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, is there anything you can do, or does there need to be that general conversation, that awareness, like, hey, this isn't actually adding value to my life anymore? Like we've got to organically come to that realization ourselves?
It all starts with awareness. So, for example, there was a physician that's in our residency training program who has 2 young kids, and she had used our Eat Right Now program and our Crave and Equip program to help actually with her skin pick. She used to pick her skin, and now her fingers are pristine. But she was sitting there. She woke up one evening. Her 2 kids were eating dinner at the table, and she was away from the table staring at her news feed. And she woke up and she's like, "Oh, I can't believe I am not connecting with my family. Well, I'm just, freaked out about the news." So it starts with awareness. It all starts with awareness. And sometimes others can point it out to us. Sometimes we're not ready to hear that news. But more often, when we can really organically wake up to how we're suffering, then that's going to be the turning point where we then start saying, "Oh, wow, what can I do about this?"
Nice. Okay. What is one thing our listeners can start doing today that will have a positive impact on their lives?
Start paying attention and pay attention to what it's like when they text a friend versus have a genuine conversation with somebody face to face. Notice the difference, right? It's a Skinner box. Which feels better? Which is more connected?
Last but not least, how can people find out more about you and your work? Where can we send them?
So I have a website, judsonbrewer.com. Our apps are goeatrightnow.com and Craving to Quit. And you mentioned my book, The Craving Mind. So those might be good ways to find more about the work that we do and also the research that I do at the Center for Mindfulness.
Judson, thank you so much for illuminating me on a lot of these topics. They're absolutely fascinating. And I really appreciate you taking time out in your day to come speak to me. So thank you.
Well, thank you. It's been a lot of fun.